Welcome to Your American Dream. I'm Anisha Jennings, and today we're exploring how cultural challenges can become professional strengths with Jo Madnani, whose journey from Pune to marketing excellence embodies the power of embracing your unique perspective. Welcome, Joe. I'm so happy to have you on my show.
Thank you, Anisha. I am excited to have this conversation. So, I am going to give a quick drive through of what my journey's been. My first stop in the US was Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And the one thing that I was amazed about, because I've worked with global agencies in India, but the market in Fort Lauderdale was very, very different. So, I had to put some things in perspective in terms of like how advertising and marketing have similar principles across the world. Um, and I realized I wasn't able to make the breakthrough. So I started volunteering my time at an ad school. I wanted to go get a higher degree, but this was undergrad. So I actually volunteered my time at the honors program where they ran that as a graphic design agency. So I was helping out with the copy. And it was a very small beginning. It was like once or twice a week. But I realized that it gave me so much confidence that, there are certain principles and there are certain ways in which advertising connects the dots across the world. So I was very fascinated by the American culture, and I was able to get like I'm a quick study. So I was able to get a quick overview of how people are thinking, what the demographic is. And most of the clients were nonprofits. So we worked on Ronald McDonald House, we worked on Boys and Girls Club of America, and it wasn't that different than what I was doing back home. And so through that network, I always joke about this. My consultancy found me. So there was a colleague who had connections in the healthcare world, and I started helping them out with direct mail campaigns. And then, social media was just raising its head during that time. So I did the whole omni-channel experience with them, with search marketing, with Facebook pages. And I also did one part of it, which I really enjoyed doing, was the experiential part. So that was the second part of my trajectory. And the third one was I was a part of a writers group. And even in India, I actually wrote for Midday and Times of India. So I was very lucky and I felt that was really cool. I was actually resenting the fact that the journalism piece became my minor, but it's funny how we resent transitions and how they open up completely different worlds. So I went into my guidance counselor's office in India. And I was like, why don't I have an internship lined up with an ad agency? What is going on? And she's like, you're a strong writer. And I strongly recommend you do the minor in journalism. And I already got you an internship at Midday. So I went very begrudgingly. And my editor was amazing. And he gave me all the fun pieces to do. I interviewed Sunita Rao and Shan. And I was always like sitting in the front row at the fashion shows. And I was like, okay, sorry, this is the universe. This is not all that bad. So anyway, that experience helped me carry through this writers group. I was helping the leader to write and edit pieces for local magazines. And I started writing for the Miami Herald. I started writing for some local fashion magazines. So I kept that going. And, it didn't pay very well, but it floated my boat because I love culture and I love like going to these art shows and learning more about the American way of life. So those were my three tracks. And then my husband, he works for a financial company, and they were like, you have to come to Manhattan. So I had to again pivot. And at that point in time, I just had one kid. So when I moved to the Northeast, I had to figure out what I had to do with my life all over again. So when people looked at my resume and they were like, you should come into pharma and healthcare. So I pivoted. I wound down the consultancy because I didn't want to keep going here because it would be starting from scratch, even though I had the chops and everything. But, New York is a very competitive market. So in the Northeast, I've been with agencies and brands. I had my second kid at 2015. So a lot of life lessons because I had a lot of health issues before I had him. So all these plot twists and pivots, they somehow have helped me become a little bit more resilient. And the one thing that became clear to me is I know like lately DE&I has been under attack. But from the very beginning, I have always focused on the and in DE&I. because I always look at things at like, don't look at where I'm from, or but where are you really from? And can you adapt to the American culture? These are the questions that were thrown in my face when I had first come in. So I have always maintained the stance that you look at a person as a whole, what they're offering to you in terms of energy, in terms of their skill, in terms of their creativity, and how can they either elevate the business problem or add value to the group you're in. And that has nothing to do with where you're from. I am Indian, but I'm also American, and I shouldn't be forced to pick one or the other. And I think that's where the pigeonholing has taught me to be a little bit more forward thinking in my ideas. So I'll pause there because I jumped around a little bit.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. That's amazing that you had so many pivots in your career, and here we are today. You're going to, oh, we'll keep that for the end. So tell us about when you came here, did you experience culture shock? I'm sure you did. How did you handle that? How did you navigate that? And what helped you sort of, you know, get your footing here?
That's a great question. So I wouldn't say shock. So here's another point I want to offer to the table. I came in here in early 2000s. So I was raised in a very modern India. So just to go back a few years, like globalization had just started to come in. When I was in college, there was Channel V, there was MTV. So we already had like windows to the world of what was happening. And also the India that I was raised in, like my dad, even though he's a boomer, obviously, but he was very supportive of how I thought differently. Because remember, advertising and marketing back in the day, they were boys' clubs. They still are, even here and in India, back home too. So the one thing I had to navigate a lot with my views is how to break through the gender dynamic, how to break through some of the stereotype conversations that were happening even in India. So one funny instance in this is I was an outlier even in my own family, meaning my dad has an engineering background, my husband's an engineer, my sister's an engineer. And, growing up in India, it's like if you are not a doctor or engineer, or you're not doing something in STEM and you don't have your entire life figured out by 30, something is wrong with you. So that's just how we are. We are very competitive, and I appreciate that. But for someone like me who was in marketing and comms, the narrative in my house was my mom was like, oh, the older one, she's doing something in advertising and fashion. The younger one, she's an engineer, and her eyes would light up. Not to say that she's not proud of me, but that was what I was up against. I was always an outlier. So when I switched countries, the one thing that I appreciated about the American culture is there was no pressure in terms of like, I have to do this in this age, otherwise I'm a loser or it's a failure. There was none of that. So the school that I was volunteering in, to give you an example, I met this 48-year-old woman who was teaching herself graphic design. And I talk to everybody. I love learning about people. I'm just very extroverted that way. So we struck up a conversation, and she's like, I was a very young mom, and I married very early. So now my kids are ready to fly the nest, and I want to reinvent who I am. And so I came to learn graphic design. And just the ease that with how she said it really struck a chord with me. So it's like, okay, you had to force yourself to pick a path early in life, but that doesn't mean you sit on that path. You can always change it. So that's one thing I appreciated about the American culture, is that you can be who you want to be at any age. The second part that I appreciated was where I was, in where my apartment was. At that time I was fresh off the board. My husband was going back and forth. So I was fresh off the board. And one thing I realized is that I wasn't really accepted in that community. It was fully Indian, and it was fully, the spouses, the people who worked at my husband's company. And I didn't feel like I belonged with them either, because they were in their own, they had their own social clique. They were very clear. They didn't want to work. And they looked at me like I had two heads. Like, why do you want to volunteer? Why are you doing all of this? And I felt a little out of place and I felt a little judged. I was like, look, you want to be home. That's great. I'm no judgment there. But I didn't get the same courtesy back. But when I would go volunteer at this place, I had the good fortune of meeting a friend. His name was Paul. He's 20 years senior than me, but he was so open and hungry to learn about, oh, tell me more about India, and like very, global mindset, and like very like trying to make me fit into this group of people. And I felt very welcomed. So that's the second part that I appreciated about the American culture, was like everyone was very like, it was almost like a horseshoe rather than a closed circle. So the conflict began in my head. It's like, why is this happening on the opposite sides of the aisle? It should have been the other way around. But it gave me a lot of insight into how one should either fit in or stand out. So that was a part of the my learning.
Very nice. That's very inspiring. So, how do you navigate being both Indian and American without feeling pressurized to choose?
Oh my God, that has been, I have to say, it has been an evolution.
Mhm.
So, the younger me in my 20s and 30s, angry young woman, like always have an opinion and I have something to say. And I also, because I was in fashion, I used that as an armor a lot, a part of my identity. So I was like, I don't want anything to do with this. I am different. And I put a lot of emphasis on standing out. And but that came at a price. When you try to stand out too much in your community, then you have to fit in on the other side too. So it's like the joke in my head was, I'm not brown enough and I'm never going to be white. So it's like no man's land. And then it took me some time to make peace with the fact that you don't have to do that. You don't have to stand out so much that you're alienating one group of people, or you don't have to fit in so much that you lose your unique sense of self and you lose your unique voice. So through my writing and through like all these experiences, like moving from Florida to the Northeast, completely different ball game. I realized one thing, and I realized that one precious thing that you can hold on to is your authentic self. There are people who will get your humor. It doesn't matter if they're American or Indian. And there are people who won't be able to stand you, no matter what you do. So I just made peace with it. I'm like, it's like I'm going to sound like an Instagram meme. Yeah, I'm too much for you or I'm too little for you. It's fine. The people pleasing at some point, maybe late 30s, early 40s, when I had the second one, I realized that, okay, it needs to stop. And I'm just going to go as Jyoti, and I'm just going to do that. If our energy matches, great. If we have chemistry as co-workers, we can produce good things. If we don't, it's all right. And I made peace with it. So that was a very big eye-opening insight for me personally.
That's lovely. That is that is challenging, and you've navigated it very gracefully. So, how do you challenge stereotypes about Southeast Asians in your work?
Oh God. How do I challenge it? I course correct. So when we're having a conversation and when someone tries to put me in a box or think of Southeast Asians as a monolith, I take it very personally and I use kindness and humor to navigate it back. I'm like, listen, just like America is big, India is also very, very diverse. Actually, we have, I don't know how many languages, more than 30 languages spoken in our country. And I think people,
Yes.
so I look at it as, I don't think people are doing that on purpose. I think that they may not be aware of the diverse cuisines, the diverse languages, the diverse fashion. Like you look at East, West, North, South, it doesn't, we don't even feel like one country. We don't look like that. People from the South look different. Punjabis and Sindhis look different. And also, there's this whole piece of the puzzle that I don't think people are aware of, which is the partition, right, in 1947. So I'm Sindhi, but if you see the Punjabis, they have Punjab, Maharashtrians have Maharashtra. Sindhis don't have a state. So I don't think it's fair to expect our American friends to understand the nuances of the post effects of the colonization and the partition. So I course correct in that way, and I'm like, hey, this is the whole story, and they were like, oh my God, we had no idea. So it comes from that place of like not knowing. So I feel I step it up and I'm like, here, this is the background. And it also comes from, so I use parallel examples in America itself, because if you look at urbanized America, they think very different than rural America. So it's the same divide. So I try to bring that into perspective. And it's I mean, I don't blame people, because how would you know the intricate history of our people? So I try to do that in the best possible way. Sometimes I do encounter people who have decided to write our people off, and then I don't engage. I'm like, I want to uphold my standard of what I view the world. But if you're going to be coming from that place where, oh, do they speak in English in India, then I just don't engage with that. I try to gracefully say, okay, moving on. India has some of the most educated and brightest minds. But then to look at someone and say, "Oh, how do you speak English so well?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I just don't engage." So I try to walk the tightrope, and
Mhm.
writer. So sometimes I have to keep my sarcasm in check,
Yes, yes.
but I want to be respectful about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I get that quite a bit too. Oh, you speak English so well. Did you speak English your whole life? Did you speak in English in India? I'm like, yes, I taught in an engineering college in English. So it's
Yes.
interesting, but again, it's coming from a place where they don't know. So what unconventional career choices have shaped your journey so far?
Every single one of them. So when I was in undergrad, like when I was doing my bachelor's, I got stuck with the wrong crowd. I mistakenly thought that I could become a chartered accountant. Thank the Lord I'm not, because I don't know how many people would have become broke in my under my firm. I quickly realized that much later. And this is one thing that I hope my daughter learns from my mistake. I got too influenced by groupthink. So, as soon as I finished my junior high, I was with the set of people who were very, very focused, laser focused on accounting and that side of the house. And at that time in India, I'm thinking in the 90s, we had three streams, as you know, like commerce, science, and arts. I'm now realizing that I was an out and out art student. I should have done English lit. I love languages, I love cultures, and I should have really stuck to my guns. But and this is back in the day, there was a lot of stigma around, like, oh, arts, like, you didn't make it to science, you didn't get into commerce, like, your grades and everything were held in that lens. So, and I don't know how, like, my own family would have thought about arts. But the point is that because I didn't know what I wanted, I went the commerce route. Then I had someone in the family who was second or third cousin degree. And this was a wedding in Bombay. And I remember meeting this woman, and she was in advertising. She was, doing her master's from NMIS in Mumbai, and she was working on the Pepsi account, working with Lintus. And that opened my mind up completely. And I was like, wait a second. And I was looking at my personality from a very different lens. I'm like, I'm a thinker, I'm a writer, I'm very creative on my feet. What am I doing with my life? So that's when I was like, no, 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 no. I somehow powered through my bachelor's. Very difficult for me to do that. I did it. And then I did my master's from Symbiosis. And I was like, no, I want to focus on advertising and PR. And this woman, she inspired me so much that I had a cousin who was working at the newspaper. And I said, do you have any connections? Like, Pune as a city was not as globalized as Bombay. And all the big ad shops were in Bombay. So there was no chance that I could win that fight with my family, because it was just a very uphill struggle. So I started working with a local ad agency, and I understood, like, what it takes to write copy, how the business works. And it really opened my mind. And I'm so glad I did that, because it's opened paths for me here that normally would not have happened if I would have stuck to the accounting rule. I can't even imagine myself. I think I did a world a favor by not being an accountant. I'll just stop at that.
Oh, that's very sweet. So, I have the similar story, but I would like to hear from you. When you were faced with these challenges of like, what's my family gonna think? How am I going, like, what will people think? That struggle. How did you navigate that and figure out a way to be the person you wanted to be and, chose your own path?
So I think I was born with that fire. And also, I lost my dad at 15. So that was 1990. And that was a huge catalyst. And I think it was like, you pour gasoline on fire. His passing was that gasoline for me. And my dad was a very modern dad. So I was like a tomboy growing up. I didn't like any of the, not to, I mean, now I'm like as girly as they come, but it took me a while to get there. And I was very much like a tomboy. And I remember questioning these stereotypes since I was as little as 8. To give you an example, my mom, she chose to be a homemaker because when she was in school, she worked a lot. And so when she and my dad fell in love, and she was very clear. She's like, I don't want to work. I worked a lot in my life. You do the breadwinning. And my dad was an entrepreneur. He had an electrical engineering business. So we were very, very upper middle class, well off, no complaints, thank God. And it was all thanks to my dad. He worked very hard. So I would see him go on these trips, Anisha, and he would walk out with his briefcase and he wouldn't even know what's in his briefcase because my mom was like his strength. My mom was his rock. So everything he needed was there. He would just call her and say, I'm going on this conference. Everything would be ready. She was like the CEO of our house. And I would be like, but why? Like, just because I'm a girl, why do I have to cook? Do I have to do this for my husband? My first question. I was like, why do I have to do this for a man? What if I had to go to a trip? Would a man do that for me? And my dad is like, oh my God. He's like, that's a good question. And why are you thinking about all of this? I'm like, no, I'm just watching this thing at home and I'm not okay with this. I want to be the one. Like I would wear his blazer like and walk around like, excuse me, like I want to go to this meeting. And
Yeah.
he would always joke with me, Anisha. He would tell me you're born in the wrong country. He's like, you're way ahead, way, way ahead of your time. And I would be like, no, 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 I'm not going to do this. And like at that time, I wasn't even sure if I wanted the whole marriage and the kids thing because I was like, this is too much work and I don't
Yes.
even like cooking. So why, just because I'm a woman, I have to do this? So that seed in me. I was very rebellious. And also after we lost him, it was just my mom, my sister, and I. So I think that gasoline of losing him, I have stood up to grown men. I have kept people in check because I had, when you lose a person you love, or when you lose something you love, the fear just got out of me. I have course corrected people. I've worked in ad agencies where, like there was a lot of sexism in India. And I had no fear. I would walk up to the branch manager's office and I'd be like, why are these jokes being made? Like, why are these sexist things being said to me? So I had that very tough exterior. So I think that helped when I moved countries because I had no fear. I'm also very like it's a little bit of a dichotomy. I'm very warm when I have to be, but if you're gonna say that if you're gonna draw a box around me and say you're a woman and you need to stay in this, okay, then it's war. No, we don't have to do that. So I think that shaped a huge part of my identity. And it was a loss, but in a way, it gave me a lot of strength and it gave me the courage to really stick to my path. And after it wasn't very rosy because when my mom is very traditional and she was like very sure that by 1920 things would happen, and we had a massive, massive fight one day. And I think my aunt stepped in and said that, you know what, don't try to put her in the same box. And I fought for it. I was like, look, you either support me and help with my master's, or we don't have to live together. I was very clear. Even like at that time, I was very, very clear. So I think she came around and she realized that I should not do that. And then my sister is an engineer. So I tried to shield my sister from all of the home housework and all of that. And then, at the end of the day, we all make made peace with each other because we were three women living alone, and we were like, okay, we have to support each other, but let's not force each other to have the same vision of life that one woman has. And so that's why in my 20s and my 30s, when I moved here, I was not able to make peace with this. I didn't want to be, I have a lot of respect for women who choose that path. It's just not for me. So that helped with all these pivots. And now I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the weight of all of it.
Yeah,
It's
makes
exhausting.
sense. It is. It does get exhausting. Thank you for sharing that. That's a very personal and emotional story, and I resonate with it because I was the same way, and my dad told me the same thing. You're born in the wrong country, and I also thought, marriage and children, it's not for me, but here we are.
Yeah. And also, look, now like that the India now has evolved so much. And even
Yes.
here, like the gender stereotyping, I feel like women are more comfortable in challenging the status quo. We're not there yet. We're not, like, there's so much inequality when you look at the load of life.
Mhm,
There's a lot of
mhm.
inequality. There's a lot of inequality in pay. So we're not there yet, but we're getting there. And I
Yes.
have hope.
So, how do you inspire the next generation to take unconventional paths?
I don't know if I can inspire them because I have a 17-year-old. I don't know how much of this resonates with her. But I think there are only two things that can keep you straight in life. So, one is really find something that you love and are passionate about in your career. And the other is it's a bit of a mix of discipline and really working on your own self. I think with social media, there's a lot of growing up too fast. And it's a very lopsided view of life. Like, it's funny, as a marketer, I love the reach that is provided. But on a personal level, I think the younger generation feels like they're always missing out on something and they don't see the whole picture. And I have a huge problem with that. So, and you can try your best to put the right values in them, but I don't know if they're going to see it the way we see it. Because we've seen the world, like I'm Gen X, so I've seen the world without social media. And it's like this constant feeling of like, I'm missing out on this, I'm missing out on this, I should be doing this. No, the only thing they can do if you want to be successful in life is work on yourself. Everything else will follow. So it's like, find what you love, keep working on yourself. And I, especially for the young girls, it's like you can fall in love and you can do all of that, but be mindful of who you're inviting in your life. And if that person is not able to support your goals, is not able to help you evolve every step of the way, then it's not worth it. So I worry a lot about this generation just because I have one sample size at home. But I just keep
Yes.
saying the same thing. It's like, find your passion, work on yourself, be as independent as you can be financially, learn to spend time alone. If you know, I get very scared of this generation. Their neck is on the phone all day long.
Mhm,
All day long,
mhm.
they're looking at what's happening outside. And
Yeah.
there is some merit to being bored. There's some merit to finding and working on yourself. So that, I don't know if I can say inspire, but I would say that's the first step. And if you do that, then you become very bulletproof.
Absolutely.
So
I
that's what
agree.
I would like to share with the young women, especially.
Yes, that's great. So can you share a time when discipline helped you overcome cultural barriers?
Every single time. So and it's, these bad experiences in life, they build character. So it started as early as my, like, early childhood. I was a little plump, so I was a little bullied, and I would take that very personally. So as I came into my teens and as I came of age, I used that and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this working out a habit. Not for any vanity reasons, but it's like, okay, you know what? Someone tried to tell me that I'm less than. So I will take that, twist it, and I'll work on myself. And I started making that as a habit. The second part about the cultural piece that you asked me is, it goes back to the same thing. I know it sounds very esoteric, but like all you can do is you can keep improving your craft. And I remember being very scared, like when I had to present an idea, because I was very conscious of my accent. The school that I was volunteering in, she offered me the department chair. She offered me a path to teaching, so adjunct faculty. But I was very self conscious of like my accent. I have to teach a class now. Will they understand it? And sometimes my daughter corrects my accent, so I was very self conscious of it. And I still didn't completely fully adapt. Like I still say I can't do this. I don't say I can't. I didn't get into it. And now I get feedback about like, yeah, you have a very different accent. So I stuck to it because I'm like, this is who I am, and I'm not going to completely code switch to make you feel comfortable. All I can do is polish my craft, polish my state of mind. And so when I'm walking into a meeting or when I'm producing a campaign, I'm taking my A game. And that 90% of the time has spoken for itself. And it took a long time for me to get there, but it's like you have to keep working on who you are. And after that, if you're still being given that, like, oh, but where's your accent? Where are you really from? Then I don't engage. I'm like, you know what? I focus, like, even when I hire people, I always look at their whole self and what they can bring to the table. Are they a good leader? Can they manage their time? Are they good at what they do? Are they working? Can they accept feedback? So, at a very humane level, the lens needs to shift. So that's how I operate.
Amazing. So, how do you leverage your multicultural perspective in the healthcare marketing?
Oh, I love that. So, in the healthcare space, when you look at, I worked in pharma and hospital marketing. So, I'll give you an example of my first award that I won in marketing. It was a surgery for scars on the midriff. Okay. And it was laparoscopic, and it was very new. And the biggest selling point of that was there will be no scars, or the scar is so minimal that, you can wear. And this is, mind you, this is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where it's bathing suit season all the time. So women were very conscious about like, oh, I have to get the surgery, but will the scar be visible and all of that. So with this technology, there was no there was no scar, or very minimal scar. So I suggested to the CEO of the hospital then that why don't we incorporate images where photography, where we can show a woman in a bathing suit, we can show a belly dancer, we can show someone in a sari, because we wear sari, and the midriff is, very visible. So the campaign, we called it No Midriff Crisis. It was like a take on No Midlife Crisis. And I used the image of a sari, and I didn't have to fight for it. And she was like, you know what? I never thought of that. I just took it to the table. I'm like, listen, let's look at the scenarios where your midriff is exposed. Definitely a two-piece bathing suit, but you also have all of these cultural things. And we got really good feedback. So it was just a matter of me introducing that on the table. The second piece I remember is when we looked at all of these health studies, okay, whether it was cardiac, cardiovascular, or whether it was GI, I noticed that there was not much representation in like the Southeast Asian populace was not represented in a way, because our bodies have different markers when it comes to certain disease states. So that I still feel like we're behind, and I think it's catching up now. Thankfully, there's a lot of representation happening in clinical trials. But or even when, I remember when my daughter was born, we are petite people. We're not very muscular in that sense. We're small people. So when I would look at her chart, like her height and weight chart, she would never be in the normal chart. And so I had an Asian doctor, and she was like, "This is totally normal because of how you are. It's genetic." But if she would not have given me that perspective, I would be thinking something is wrong with my child. Like, why is she not in the chart, not even figuring in the chart anywhere. So these are little nuances that I have helped, like the multicultural background really comes to play. And then even when I'm working on a campaign or when I'm working on a strategic brief, I start researching, like, are there data points on Southeast Asians or even African American, they have different markers in their body. So it's like there's a lot of work done in healthcare right now that people are making sure that it's represented in data points. And like the campaign example that I gave you, that's like I was very surprised to see how receptive people were to that.
So you won 10 ADDY awards. Tell us what these awards are and what are the strategies that helped you win them?
So these are awards issued by the American Advertising Federation, AAF. And I've been very fortunate to work with two brilliant design partners that made this happen. So there's different categories in these. It's called ADDY Awards. So the different categories, and you submit your work, and there's a jury that looks at it. And there's gold, silver, the special mention. So once all the work is submitted by agencies, independent smaller agencies, the jury looks at it and they look at it they evaluate it with certain criteria, and then that's where they award gold or silver and honorable mention or whatever. So the this used to be in Fort Lauderdale, but it's national. But all of my work at that time was in Fort Lauderdale. And I was also volunteering my time with the AdFed, the Advertising Federation. So I was a communications chair, and my graphic design partner, she would help produce the winner's book and whatnot. So it's like you submit an entry, and then you don't find out until the very end, obviously, just the way it is. And they look at it from um, the reach of the campaign. They look at it on creative brilliance, and that's when these categories are announced and honored. So that's the very top level background of the awards. So I don't think I had like a formula or a process. I think it was really dependent on the work, and most of these are in healthcare. So like that example that I gave you, that was an award winner. Then the other example I want to give you is about a cardiovascular mailer. And that's where my cultural roots also kicked in. So that was the very first mailer, and that mailer is very special to me. And I'm saying mailer now, but it became a Facebook thing. We did an event around it. It was like omni-channel, but the idea started off as a direct mail. This was about cardiovascular health, and the goal of the mailer was to encourage people to get checked before it's too late. And if you notice in healthcare advertising, at least here, I've noticed that there's a lot of fear factor, like do this or else this is going to happen to you. Or whereas in our culture, because of yoga and Ayurveda, we always focus on maintenance rather than prevention. So it's like, sorry, not prevention, rather than reaction. Prevention is better than cure. That's always like our way of thinking. And that is not a one day thing or a magic pill thing. That requires a discipline in diet and exercise and body and mind. So I tapped into that ancient wisdom of ours, and I was like, okay, how can we motivate them without fear? And the breakthrough line that we came up with is love your heart better. And it's very simple, but it's not easy. And loving your heart better means making sure you're getting cardio 45 minutes 3 times a week, or you're making sure that you're eating heart healthy foods and not clogging up those arteries, or if you have hereditary risks, how you can be mindful of that, and pay attention to biomarkers. So it was a very different way of saying the same thing, but instead of coming from a place of fear, it was more from a place of love and care. So that's where I felt like that was like an Indian way to think. But so
Yes.
going back to the how we arrived at it, I don't think it was formulaic. I think it was every campaign had a unique goal. And
Mhm.
the one thing that we always strive for is how can we go against the grain? Like we didn't want
Yes.
what the competition was doing. And of course, it's not just creative and it's not just amazing. It's also like, how did it perform? So each of these awards that you see in my bio, in my resume, there is a corresponding ROI percentage on it. Like, how did it fare? How many people did it reach? Did it make a difference? And so to me, that is more meaningful as a marketer. Obviously, as an artist, like, who doesn't want the awards? But
Yes.
did it make a difference? Did it move the needle? And I think that was what was floating my boat.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on 10 awards.
Thank you.
What advice would you give someone struggling with cultural identity in their career?
Again, at the risk of sounding very simplistic, I would say just be authentic. The more authentic you are, the more people, you draw people in versus you trying to, you know, force fit into a particular group. And by the same token, being authentic doesn't mean you stick so much to your culture that you don't have an open mind. And I always joke about this to people who move countries. I'm like, listen, no one is waiting with a welcome wagon at the airport, like, oh, Joe has just arrived. I'm going to make her feel comfortable. No, I think it's your job. It's your job to understand the environment you're walking into. It's your job to understand how can you fit in. And this is really a preview of the book that I'm writing. My poems are all about this, about finding that intersection where you don't code switch so much that you lose track of who you are because now you're like all American and like you're watching football games and eating pizza. No. Or you don't lean into like you're going somewhere and you're taking like my culture, my culture, my culture, and you're alienating everybody else. I think there is a middle path. It doesn't have to be either or. And the magic happens with the end. Okay. So it's like that's my advice. Like if you are someone who's just moving countries, it's like keep the best of both worlds. I grew up in India, but when I came here, I couldn't relate to some of the first and the second gen Indians because they have a very old view of what India used to be when their parents might have migrated. But that's not the reality now. So we look alike, but we don't think alike. So I think that's something that also to be mindful of is stay true to your values and find people with the right values, whether they're Indian, American, I don't know, any part of the world. If you have if you have similar values, then the more the merrier. But yeah, don't lean in like me. Learn from my mistake. Don't lean in too much into standing out or fitting in. And honestly, when I tried fitting, it didn't work. It worked for a month, and I'm like, this is really not who I am. And I immediately snapped back to who I am.
Yeah.
So be 100% comfortable with who you are, and it's a lifelong thing, right? Learning who we are is a lifelong thing because we're not the same as we
Absolutely.
were. So
Mhm.
I would go lean into our ancient wisdom of know thyself. And
Yes.
when you are clear on who you are, you take that clarity into every group as a friend, as a colleague, and people are like, okay, that's who she is. Okay, cool. She's cool. Or
Mhm.
it's not my cup of tea. And then, so you automatically build your own star and you attract
Yes.
the right people. But if you're not clear, then you're going to belong nowhere.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that. That's golden advice. So tell us about your book, the special part. Tell us about, how you how this book came into being and what it is all about and what we can look forward to in the book. And if you can share a small snippet from your book, that would be amazing.
So this book was born actually in 2020, and the whole world shut down. And I am a big fan of The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. So I was rigorously doing the morning pages, and this book was born in the morning pages. And the place it was born from was actually, have you heard of the poet Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi? So he wrote a beautiful line, and I think this is what symbolizes the book for me. He wrote the line where he says, "The wound is where the light enters you." And the more I started journaling the morning pages, you have to write 3 pages, and it's like very stream of consciousness writing. There's no strategy, there's no like prompt. It's just 3 pages in the morning, and I started to remember all of the good and the bad, like the good being having a nice trajectory, really finding success in what I love doing, however small it may be, and the bad being, I also had some not so great colleagues and bosses where I did feel othered. I also met some women who were from my culture but who never were able to accept me for what I was, and in that whole scheme of things, the pieces of myself that I started to lose, they all sprung up in this book, and they started coming to me as poems. So it took me a very long time to stop apologizing for being an outlier and to just make peace with it. I am not everybody's cup of tea. I'm not your typical Indian that you meet, and I'm fine with it. I don't want to be. So some of the poems I've called the stereotype. Some I've called, this one is my favorite. I've called it the paper plate mafia, where, I mean, however confident you are, however strong you can be, but when someone goes out of their way to make you feel like you don't belong, it hurts you as a person. And it makes you question, like, oh, am I really that different that I cannot fit in? So that whole poem is like a story where how I met this woman and how I realized at the end of it, at the end of that hurt, was a nice gift of realization. And that realization was just be who you are. And you're never going to win over everyone. And this whole people pleasing thing. So some of those poems are coming home to that realization. Then the other poem is fitting in or standing out. And the crux of that poem is you don't have to do either or. I always like the and is my favorite word. Right now I'm looking at all the data points. And exactly a year and a half ago, I wrote an article on DE&I, and I focused on the and now it's under attack. DE&I is under attack because people are questioning what it's worth. And, even in that article, I've called out the same things that we're having in this conversation. We're not a monolith. We are not Asians. Like, you cannot categorize Asians in one bucket. There are many nuances. And the other thing I realized, now, in even when DE&I was having its moment, was really the people of color who this was meant for. They were being asked to do all of the work. It's like when you plan an office party and you're doing all of the work for the party. It's like, okay, you have the DE&I party, but you're asking the people of color to pick up that. So some of that came to light, and now a lot of people, are very divided on it. So again, it goes back to intersectionality. You don't have to pick one side over the other. It's not about giving one group of people preference over the other. It's about understanding. And I think that understanding comes with having that mindset. So some poems are on that. And right now I'm in rejection land. I've been trying to haul it to all journals to build up my street cred, getting a lot of no's. But I'm not going to give up because I really believe in this. And I think people like you, people like me, I think will relate to it. If I'm a marketer, so I'm thinking of the tagline as it's for outliers everywhere who feel like they don't belong.
That's amazing. Yes. So can't wait for your book. And yes, do not give up. And I wish you the best. And hopefully everything will work out and your book will be out soon. Do you have a poem you would like to share with us?
Sure. So I think the one poem I can share is exactly what we spoke about today. And it's called just that. It's called Fit In, Stand Out. Fit in, stand out, or do both. I say do neither. Let your true self be the anchor. The water will adjust around you. Mingle, but stay true to you.
Lovely. That's amazing. I can't wait for your book. If
Thank
this
you.
is so good, I can't wait to see what else is in there. So tell us about your business. The idea is in. What is it all about, and what do you do?
So the idea then is a collective representation of what I do. That used to be what my consultancy was called in Florida. And right now I'm in a transition. I'm trying to figure out my next full-time move. So I didn't close down the LLC. I've kept it. So I'm consulting on and off with brands and agencies until I find my next temporary home. I'm saying temporary because everything is temporary nowadays. So I just kept the moniker. So that's what it is. That's what my agency was called in Florida. So I just kept it. I never dissolved the LLC, even though I stopped, working with clients because my priority shifted with my second one and working in the Northeast. So I couldn't do all. So I kept the name, but it represents every small or big project that I do.
Amazing. So if people want to reach out to you, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
So the idea is in at gmail.com and my website, theideaisin.com. That's the best way. Email is best. And you can find me on LinkedIn also, Jo Madnani. But happy to help anyone who has problems navigating this journey because it's tough. It's not easy.
Yes. So if you want to leave our listeners with 2 or 3 takeaways from your journey this far and your learning and your lessons, what would they be?
They would be, one is really stay true to your brand. I'm saying brand because I'm a marketer, and your brand meaning your whole self. Two is be strategic when you pivot. Life is not going to be a smooth ride. It never is for anybody. But when you pivot, just be strategic. And the third thing is you're responsible for your joy. So keep creating it. If you're going to look outside for it, you're never going to get it. So keep creating joy. Find something that you love to do. And it makes life much easier.
Thank you so much for sharing it. Thank you so much for your time and for giving us all this great information. And I can't wait for your book. All the best for your book.
Thank you. Thank you for all this work. And I've really had a very nice time talking to you.
As we wrap up this episode with Jo Madnani, remember that your cultural identity isn't an obstacle. It's your superpower in business. This is Anisha Jennings reminding you that sometimes the most powerful stories come from the intersections of who we are. Until next time.